I was standing in my brother Marcus's garage at 2:47 a.m., staring at wedding favors with my name crossed out in thick black Sharpie and Delilah written underneath in my sister-in-law's careful handwriting. 200 ivory boxes, each one a small slap across the face. My hands were shaking as I held one up to the dim overhead light, reading the gold script. Thank you for celebrating with Marcus and Delilah. The concrete floor felt unsteady beneath my feet, and somewhere in the house behind me, I could hear the low murmur of voices planning a wedding that was supposed to include me as best man until 3 hours ago. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Ira, we need to talk about why you can't be in the wedding anymore, but not tonight. The metallic taste of betrayal filled my mouth as I realized this wasn't about my recent promotion at the firm or the argument we'd had last month. This was something much deeper, much more calculated. My name is Ira Blackwood, and for the past 7 years, I've been the lead contracts attorney at Meridian Legal Solutions in downtown Portland. Every morning at 6:15, I'd sit in the same corner booth at Rossi's Cafe, black coffee and a plain bagel, reviewing case files before the office chaos began. The barista, an older woman named Gloria, knew my order by heart and would have it waiting before I even reached the counter. My apartment on Hawthorne Boulevard was sparse, but organized, law books stacked in perfect columns, a single framed photo of Marcus and me at his college graduation, and my grandfather's mahogany desk where I'd spend most evenings preparing for the next day's battles. I'd inherited my grandfather's methodical nature and his talent for finding loopholes in seemingly airtight contracts. That skill had saved Meridian over $2 million in the past 18 months alone. Marcus used to joke that I could find a way out of any trap, legal or otherwise. He'd say it with pride, the way older brothers do when they're genuinely impressed by something their little brother accomplished. I was 3 years younger, but had always been the one he called when life got complicated, when he needed someone to review his lease agreement, when he got that speeding ticket, when he was trying to figure out how to propose to Delilah. The thing about being good at finding loopholes is that you develop an instinct for when something doesn't add up. You learn to spot the inconsistencies, the missing pieces, the deliberate omissions. If this story hits home, make sure you're subscribed. We tell these for a reason. The first crack appeared 6 months ago at Marcus's birthday dinner. I'd driven 4 hours from Portland to Salem to be there, rearranging my entire week around a major client presentation. When I walked into Romano's, our childhood favorite restaurant, I found Marcus and Delilah already seated with her brother Trevor, a guy I'd met maybe twice in the 3 years they'd been together. Marcus stood up to hug me, but his smile felt rehearsed. We need to talk later, he said quietly, but then spent the entire evening discussing Trevor's new construction business with an enthusiasm I hadn't heard in his voice when he talked about my recent partnership track promotion. Every story I tried to share about work was met with polite nods before the conversation inevitably shifted back to Trevor's projects. The second crack came during Christmas. I'd flown back from a conference in Denver, exhausted but determined not to miss our family tradition of opening presents on Christmas Eve. When I arrived at Marcus's house, I found him and Delilah in the living room with photo albums spread across the coffee table, wedding planning materials, venue brochures, and a handwritten list titled Wedding Party. Trevor's name was written in the best man slot. My name wasn't on the list at all. When I asked about it, Marcus got defensive. Things change, Ira. Trevor's been more available lately. You're always buried in work, always traveling. This wedding needs someone who can be present. I'd taken exactly 3 business trips in the past year, each one lasting less than a week. Meanwhile, Trevor lived 20 minutes away and worked construction, flexible schedule, available whenever needed. But that wasn't really the issue, and we both knew it. The issue was that somewhere along the line, I'd become the brother who succeeded too much, who made everyone else feel small by comparison, who needed to be managed rather than celebrated. The text message arrived while I was reviewing a merger agreement at my desk on a Thursday afternoon in March. Marcus's name appeared on my phone screen. Emergency family meeting tonight. Can you drive down? Really need you here. I canceled 2 client calls and made the drive to Salem in record time, my mind racing through possibilities. Had something happened to our parents? Was someone sick? Marcus had never used the word emergency lightly. When I pulled into his driveway, I noticed Trevor's white pickup truck parked across the street. That should have been my first warning. Marcus met me at the door with the expression I'd never seen before, guilty but resolved, like someone who'd already made a decision they knew would hurt. Delilah sat on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, avoiding eye contact. Trevor stood near the window, arms crossed, looking like he belonged there. "We need to discuss the wedding situation," Marcus began, and I knew immediately this wasn't about illness or family crisis. This was about me being systematically removed from the most important day of my brother's life. The conversation lasted 47 minutes. I know because I kept glancing at the clock on their mantel, trying to ground myself as Marcus explained why Trevor would be a better fit as best man. Trevor understood the construction business that was paying for half the wedding. Trevor had more time to help with preparations. Trevor didn't make Delilah's family feel awkward with all that legal talk. But the real blow came when Delilah finally spoke. She looked directly at me and said that having me in the wedding party might send the wrong message to her family about their values. That my success made other people uncomfortable. That maybe it would be better if I just attended as a regular guest. The room fell silent. Even Trevor looked uncomfortable. Marcus stared at his hands, and I realized he'd already agreed to this. They'd discussed demoting his own brother behind closed doors, weighing my worth against wedding politics and social comfort. I left without saying another word. But I didn't drive home to Portland. Instead, I sat in my car outside their house for 3 hours, watching their living room window, planning. I spent that night in a motel room in Salem, staring at the water-stained ceiling and replaying every family gathering from the past 2 years. Every subtle slight, every redirected conversation, every moment when my achievements had been met with strained smiles instead of genuine celebration. Around 3 a.m., I found myself thinking about our grandfather, the man who'd taught me that being good at something wasn't something to apologize for. He'd built his law practice from nothing, working 18-hour days to give his family a better life. When other people criticized his success, he'd just smile and say that crabs in a bucket always try to pull each other down. I remembered sitting in his office when I was 12, watching him prepare for a case that everyone said was unwinnable. A small business owner was being crushed by a corporate contract that seemed airtight. But Grandpa found the loophole. A single misplaced comma that invalidated the entire agreement. He saved that man's livelihood with attention to detail and relentless preparation. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about being demoted from best man. This was about being punished for refusing to make myself smaller to accommodate other people's insecurities. They wanted me to disappear, to stop being successful, to stop making them feel inadequate by comparison. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd assumed I would just accept their decision and fade quietly into the background. They forgot that finding loopholes is what I do for a living. And they'd just handed me the biggest challenge of my career. I checked out of the motel at dawn and drove back to Portland with a plan already forming in my mind. The first step was research. I spent the next 2 weeks doing what I do best, digging through documents and finding inconsistencies. Marcus had always been careless with details, and this wedding was no exception. I started with the obvious: vendor contracts, venue agreements, and payment schedules. What I discovered was even better than I'd hoped. Trevor's construction company, the business that had supposedly made him so invaluable to the wedding planning, was in serious financial trouble. 3 months behind on equipment loans, 2 active lawsuits from subcontractors, and a contractor's license that was set to expire in 6 weeks due to unpaid state fees. But the real gold mine was in the wedding contracts themselves. Marcus and Delilah had cut corners everywhere, choosing vendors who offered the lowest bids without reading the fine print. The photographer's contract included a clause that allowed for cancellation with 72 hours' notice if payment wasn't received in full. The catering company required final headcount confirmation 2 weeks before the event, with a 30% penalty for last-minute changes. The venue had a strict noise ordinance clause that would void their deposit if exceeded. My first mistake was moving too quickly. I anonymously sent information about Trevor's business troubles to Delilah's father, thinking it would create immediate friction. Instead, They rallied around Trevor, with Marcus offering to co-sign a loan to help save the construction company. I'd accidentally strengthened their bond instead of weakening it. The second setback came when I tried to exploit the photographer's payment clause. I'd planned to delay their payment processing, but Delilah's father caught the bank error I'd arranged and corrected it before the 72-hour window expired. Each failure taught me something important. This couldn't be about obvious sabotage. It had to look like natural consequences of their own poor planning and questionable decisions. The revenge had to be invisible until it was too late to fix. That's when I decided to focus on the one person who'd orchestrated my removal, Delilah herself. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at Willowbrook Gardens, a venue that specialized in outdoor ceremonies. What Marcus and Delilah didn't know was that I'd spent considerable time reviewing their vendor contracts and cross-referencing them with public records, business licenses, and court filings. Friday morning, I made a series of phone calls. The first was to the Oregon State Contractors Board, reporting that an unlicensed contractor, Trevor's company, had officially lost its license 3 days earlier due to unpaid fees, was performing work on the wedding venue's gazebo renovation. The inspector arrived within 2 hours and shut down all construction, leaving half the ceremony space unusable. The second call was to the catering company's corporate office. I discovered that their local franchise was operating under a suspended health permit, something that could be verified through public records. The health department arrived just as the catering truck was unloading, and the entire food service was immediately shut down. But the masterpiece was saved for Delilah herself. While researching Trevor's business problems, I'd stumbled across something fascinating. Delilah had been quietly investing in Trevor's construction company for 8 months, using money from a joint account she shared with Marcus. The investments totaled nearly $40,000, money that Marcus believed was being saved for their honeymoon and first house. More importantly, the investment made her a business partner in a company that was now facing federal tax liens for unpaid payroll taxes. As a partner, she was personally liable for those debts. I compiled everything into a neat folder: bank records, investment documents, tax liens, and a detailed breakdown of her financial exposure. Then I had it hand-delivered to Marcus at his office on Friday afternoon, exactly 24 hours before his wedding. The accompanying note was simple: "Your fiancée has been lying to you for months." These documents are all public record. You might want to ask her about Trevor's business before you sign a marriage certificate. By Friday evening, the wedding was canceled. Not because of sabotage, but because of truth. I didn't attend the non-wedding. Instead, I spent that Saturday morning hiking the trails at Silver Falls, something I hadn't done since college. The forest was quiet except for the sound of water cascading over rocks, and for the first time in months, my phone stayed silent. Marcus called me Sunday evening. His voice was exhausted, hollow in a way I'd never heard before. The conversation lasted 3 hours. He apologized, not just for the best man situation, but for months of making me feel like my success was something to be managed rather than celebrated. Delilah had moved back in with her parents. The financial deception had been worse than even I had realized. She'd been systematically hiding debts and expenses, using Trevor's business as a way to funnel money away from their joint savings. Marcus had discovered that their wedding fund was nearly empty, spent on propping up a construction company that was never going to survive. Trevor, it turned out, had been more than just a business partner to Delilah. The relationship had been going on for 7 months. 2 weeks later, Marcus drove up to Portland and appeared at my office without warning. We went to Rossi's Cafe, where Gloria served us both coffee and pretended not to notice that Marcus had been crying. He asked me how I'd known to look for the financial records. I told him the truth, that being good at finding loopholes means you develop an instinct for when something doesn't add up. We sat there for 2 hours, talking about everything except revenge. About family, about trust, about the difference between protecting someone and enabling their worst decisions. 3 months later, I received a package in the mail. Inside was a wedding favor box, ivory with gold script, but this time, it had the correct name: "Thank you for celebrating with Marcus and Elena." Elena was a pediatric nurse he'd met during his recovery from all this mess. Someone who thought his little brother being a successful attorney was something worth bragging about. I kept that favor box on my desk at work, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones most threatened by your refusal to make yourself smaller. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their choices. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually. You can either be the one who brings it to light, or you can wait for it to emerge on its own timeline, usually when the damage is irreversible. I chose to accelerate the inevitable. And sometimes, that's exactly what love looks like, even when it doesn't feel gentle, even when it doesn't look like forgiveness. Some betrayals teach you who people really are. Others teach you who you're willing to become.